The green room is a beautiful cage. You can feel it in the air, a static charge of manufactured anticipation. It smells of new suits, faint cologne, and the sweet, cloying scent of hope about to be monetized. You see them there, the chosen few, sitting on those plush couches surrounded by proud families, their names stitched onto jerseys they have not yet earned. The camera loves them. It drinks in the nervous smile, the whispered reassurance from a mother, the firm handshake from a father. The television broadcast packages it as the culmination of a lifetime of work. The first day of the rest of your life. We are sold a story of meritocracy, of destiny, of a dream realized before our eyes. The commissioner walks to the podium, the envelope in his hand holding a secret that will change everything. He speaks the name. The young man's face transforms. A seismic shift from anxiety to unadulterated joy. He hugs his family. He dons the hat of his new team. He walks the gauntlet of applause, ascends the stage, and holds up the jersey with his name on it. This is the story. It is clean, emotional, and perfect. It is also a profound and deliberate illusion. What you are witnessing in that moment of celebration is not a beginning. It is the final public act of a long and quiet conquest. That handshake with the commissioner is not a greeting. It is the sealing of a bargain the young man had no true hand in negotiating. The jersey he holds aloft is not a gift. It is a uniform in the most literal sense, marking his conscription into a system meticulously designed generations before he was born. The smile, the tears, the overwhelming relief, they are real. But they are the human response to stepping onto a conveyor belt whose destination and rules were fixed in a boardroom, not on a field. The chaos of draft day is not the chaos of chance. It is the chaotic surface of a deeply still and controlled pond. The machinery beneath is cold, legal, and inexorable. It has been turning for almost a century, and in that moment, as the flashbulbs pop and the music swells, a fundamental transaction occurs, one we have been conditioned to see as a coronation, but which in any other industry would be seen for what it is: the highly theatrical transfer of a unique asset into a legally binding state of controlled ownership. I want you to consider the silence that follows the roar. After the stage walk, after the press conferences, after the highlights reel of his college triumphs plays for the last time, the player is ushered into a back room. There is a table. There are documents. The emotion of the evening is now met with the fine print of the morning. The contract placed before him is not a negotiation. It is a manifesto. Its terms, its length, its value, even the rights it grants to the team over his future, have been largely preordained by a collective bargaining agreement he had no vote in, built upon a draft system whose legality rests on a series of arcane and fiercely protected loopholes. He is not signing a contract of employment as you or I might understand it. He is accepting the terms of his own auction after the gavel has already fallen. The dream has been quantified, codified, and constrained. The control over his labor, the most valuable thing he will ever own, begins its calculated dissipation. Think of the language we use. We say he was drafted by a team. The word is military in origin. It means to conscript, to select by compulsion for service. We say he was taken with the 5th pick. He was selected. The vocabulary is passive for the player, active for the club. He is the object, not the subject. His agency, so fiercely demonstrated on the field for years, is suddenly and completely suspended. For all his strength, his speed, his intelligence, he has no power in this market. He cannot choose his employer. He cannot solicit a better offer. He cannot use the interest of one franchise as leverage against another. His only option, if he wishes to play in the National Football League, is to say yes. This is not a free market. It is a fun-pay system, and its architects did not stumble upon it. They built it piece by legal piece to ensure that the ultimate power always remained with the institutions, not the individuals. I remember talking to a veteran executive, a man who had been on both sides of that green room curtain. He said something off camera that never left me. He said, "The draft isn't about the players. The draft is for the fans and the owners. For the fans, it's a show. For the owners, it's the annual restocking of the plantation." The brutality of that analogy hung in the air. He wasn't speaking of people, but of power. The power to allocate talent, to control costs, to manage assets. The player, in that cold transactional view, is the prime commodity. And the draft is the mechanism that ensures that commodity enters the market not as a free agent, but as a bound servant to a single master. His value is suppressed from the moment his name is called, for the benefit of the system itself. The celebrated parity of the league, the fact that a team can go from worst to first, is the brilliant public relations spin placed on this system of control. We are told it is for competitive balance. And perhaps, in a way, it is. But balance for whom? For the franchises, certainly. For the players, the balance is always tipped away from them. So let us pull the camera back from the strobe lights of the draft stage. Let us step out of the green room and into the musty archives, the court transcripts, the minutes of long-forgotten league meetings. The story of the modern draft is not a sports story. It is a legal story. It is a story of American capitalism, antitrust law, and the ingenious construction of a loophole so large an entire industry now drives through it. It is the story of how the owners of professional football teams, facing the existential threat of competition for talent, colluded to eliminate that competition altogether. They drafted a system, in every sense of the word, that would bind young men to their employers in a way that would be illegal for any other profession in America. They then spent decades defending it, fortifying it, and repackaging it until we all believed it was as natural a part of the game as the pigskin itself. This is the sound of the machine. Not the roar of the crowd, but the quiet click of a gavel in a hotel ballroom in 1936. The scratch of a fountain pen on a collective bargaining agreement in 1993. The cold, logical language of a Supreme Court justice pondering the meaning of restraint of trade. We have been sold the drama of the draft night for so long that we have forgotten to question the stage upon which it is set. Who built it? By what right does it stand? And what happens to the human being who steps into its spotlight, believing he is seizing his destiny, when in truth, a destiny was already written for him long before he ever laced up his cleats? This series is an excavation. We will go back to the beginning, to the chaos that necessitated this control. We will meet the men who designed the system, not out of malice, but out of a ruthless desire for order and profit. We will walk through the court battles where players, realizing they were bound in a way no other workers were, fought to break the chains, only to see those chains reforged in the fires of collective bargaining. We will look at the economic models that prove irrefutably the massive financial value extracted from players by this system of entry. We will hear from the ones who were bound, not just the stars who eventually broke free, but the thousands of journeymen for whom the draft was not a beginning, but a permanent sentence to a market with no leverage. This is the story of the legal loopholes that built the modern draft. It is the story of how the NFL mastered the art of selling liberation while perfecting the science of control. The first question we must ask is the simplest and the most chilling. At what exact moment does a player, in the eyes of the league, cease to be a person pursuing a dream and become property awaiting assignment? The National Football League is a masterpiece of modern enterprise. It is a sprawling, billion-dollar ecosystem of athleticism, entertainment, and narrative. Its product is violence, codified into strategy, and its appeal is timeless. We speak of its legends, its dynasties, its moments of breathtaking human achievement. We analyze its coaches, its schemes, its revolutions in training and physiology. But to truly understand the NFL, to comprehend the foundation upon which its competitive balance and its financial empire rests, you must look past the highlight films and the championship parades. You must examine the mechanism that feeds the machine. You must understand the draft, not as a television spectacle, but as the single most important piece of economic engineering in American professional sports. It is the linchpin. Remove it and the entire structure as we know it collapses. This is not hyperbole. It is economic fact. The draft is the annual reassertion of a fundamental truth, that the league operates not as a free market for talent, but as a monopoly. A monopoly is a market where there are many sellers of labor, the players, but only one true buyer, the collective of NFL teams acting through this draft system. It is the legalized control of a supply chain. And this control was not inherited from the heavens. It was willed into existence defended in courtrooms, and polished for public consumption. This series will trace the construction of that control. We will expose the legal loopholes born from collusion, nurtured by exemption, and hardened by collective bargaining that built the modern draft and, by extension, the modern NFL. To appreciate the invention, you must first understand the chaos it solved. In the early 1930s, professional football was a precarious, often ragged enterprise. The league was young, teams rose and fell with alarming frequency, and the competition for talent was not a gentleman's affair. It was a border war. There was no draft. A player graduating from college was a free agent in the truest sense. He could sell his services to the highest bidder or to the most persuasive coach. This created a glaring problem for the owners. Wealthier teams, or more aggressive ones, could corner the market on the best incoming talent. The Boston Redskins and the Chicago Bears might find themselves in a bidding war for a star halfback from Stanford, driving up the price and destabilizing the delicate financial equilibrium of the fledgling league. The playing field was economically uneven, and for a group of businessmen trying to build a stable cartel, this was an existential threat. The problem, in the owner's view, was not the exploitation of young men. It was the competition for their services. As Green Bay Packers founder Curly Lambeau reportedly lamented at a league meeting, "The rich get richer, and the poor get poorer." The solution, therefore, was not to create fairness for the player, but to enforce fairness among the owners. They needed to eliminate the bidding. They needed to socialize the acquisition of talent. They needed a system of allocation. The architect of this system was a man named Bert Bell. A former coach and part owner of the Philadelphia Eagles, Bell looked at the league's chaos and saw a simple, brutal fix. In 1935, he proposed a revolutionary idea: an annual pooling of college talent. The teams would select players in inverse order of their finish the previous season, from worst to first. Each team would have exclusive negotiating rights with the player they selected. No other team could make an offer. If the player did not want to sign with that team, his only option was to not play professional football in the NFL. Bell's argument was pragmatic. It would ensure parity. It would control costs. It would, above all, stop the owners from cannibalizing each other. At a meeting at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Philadelphia on May 19, 1936, the league adopted Bell's plan. The first draft was a far cry from today's spectacle. It was held in a hotel ballroom with no fans, no media, and no green room. The selections were written on a blackboard. The first player ever drafted, Jay Berwanger of the University of Chicago, never played a down in the NFL. He chose not to sign. His rights were traded, and he pursued a career in business. It was an inauspicious start, but the principle was established. The gavel had fallen. The owners had successfully colluded to eliminate competition for labor. In any other industry, this would have been a blatant violation of the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890, which prohibited conspiracies in restraint of trade. But professional sports, even then, existed in a gray area of American law and culture. The league was not selling widgets. It was selling competition itself. This ambiguity was the first and most crucial loophole they would step through. The draft was only the first maneuver in a campaign of control. Captured the player at the moment of entry. But what about after his first contract? To maintain the system, the league needed to restrict movement throughout a player's career. This led to the development of the reserve clause in contracts and later the Rozelle Rule, named for Commissioner Pete Rozelle. These mechanisms gave a player's team perpetual rights to him, or demanded such onerous compensation from any team that signed him that it effectively froze the market. A player was bound to one franchise, from draft day until the franchise decided it was done with him. The legal philosophy being exploited was now in full view. The NFL was arguing that these restraints on labor, the draft, the reserve rules were not illegal restraints of trade because they were essential for the league's existence. They argued that without these controls, competitive balance would vanish, the strong would destroy the weak, and the league itself would crumble. The survival of the entity justified the suppression of the individual's economic rights. It was a trade-off. The players' freedom for the league's stability. The problem was that the players were never asked to consent to that trade-off. It was imposed upon them by the very parties who benefited from it. This series will move through the key legal battlegrounds where this philosophy was tested. We will examine the case of Joe Kapp, the quarterback who refused to be owned, and whose 1974 lawsuit, Kapp v. NFL, delivered a seismic shock to the system. We will follow the journey of John Mackey, the Hall of Fame tight end and union president, whose 1976 case, Mackey v. NFL, successfully challenged the Rozelle rule as an antitrust violation. These were landmark victories for player rights, but they led to a paradoxical result. The league, losing in the courtroom, turned to the negotiating table. The legal loophole of antitrust exemption was weakening, so they constructed a new, more formidable one: the collective bargaining agreement. In the 1993 CBA, the owners made a strategic bargain with the NFL Players Association. They agreed to a form of free agency, a concession to the players. But in return, they had the union explicitly agree to reinstate the draft and a new system of free agency restrictions. By having the players' own union sanction these restraints, the owners moved them from the vulnerable realm of antitrust law, where they were inherently suspect, into the protected realm of labor law. Once the union agreed to the draft, it became a mandatory subject of bargaining, immune from most antitrust challenges. The loophole was no longer a crack in the law, it was a fortified treaty. As legal scholar and economist Simon Rottenberg articulated in his seminal 1956 paper, The Baseball Players' Labor Market, a reserve clause system transfers wealth from players to owners. The NFL system, built from Bell's draft through Rozelle's rule and into the modern CBA, is the most effective version of this wealth transfer ever devised in sports. We will dive into the cold economics of it. We will show how the rookie wage scale, touted as a fix for outlandish contracts for unproven players, was in fact a masterstroke of cost containment, further suppressing the entry-level market. We will dissect the franchise tag, that draconian device that allows a team to bind a star player for a year, and often twice against his will. We will analyze the fifth-year option for first-round picks, a modern innovation that extends team control over a player's most valuable athletic years. Each of these is a tributary feeding the same river, control. We will hear from the men caught in this system, not just the famous names who eventually transcended it, but the rank and file, the journeymen whose careers and earning potential were irrevocably shaped by the team that drafted them and the system that gave them no recourse. Their stories are the human data points in this grand experiment in managed labor. This documentary is an investigation into power. It is about how a sports league successfully rebranded collusion as parity, restraint as tradition, and control as the natural order. The draft night spectacle is the pageant. The legal architecture beneath it is the empire. We will peel back the velvet curtain to show the steel girders. We will ask the uncomfortable questions. Is a system that would be illegal for engineers or actors or plumbers justifiable for athletes in the name of competitive balance? Has the balance been for the game or for the owners of the game? And what does it mean for the soul of a sport when its most celebrated annual event is, at its core, the ritualized distribution of human capital? The journey begins not on the stage in Nashville or Kansas City, but in the dust of the 1930s with a group of worried men in a Philadelphia hotel, deciding that the best way to build their dream was to first ensure that the dreamers had nowhere else to go. The story of the modern NFL begins not with a touchdown, but with a problem of accounting. In the mid-1930s, the league was a fragile coalition, a collection of franchises often closer to semi-professional clubs than to the corporate entities we know today. Teams in larger markets, or with wealthier, more aggressive owners, possessed a distinct and destabilizing advantage. They could simply outspend their rivals for the best incoming talent. The player market was a free-for-all, a post-collegiate frontier where a young man with a powerful leg or a quick pair of hands could, in theory, auction his services to the highest bidder. This was the natural state of a competitive labor market. And for the owners of the National Football League, it was an existential crisis. Their cartel was being undermined from within by the very principles of capitalism they otherwise championed. The rich were getting richer, and the poor, the franchises in smaller cities or with less liquidity, were facing extinction. The solution would not come from a visionary coach or a revolutionary playbook. It would come from a failed coach and a struggling owner who saw salvation not in improving his product on the field, but in rigging the marketplace off of it. His name was Bert Bell. To understand Bert Bell's motivation is to understand the desperation of the NFL's early years. Bell was not a detached theorist. He was in the trenches. A former University of Pennsylvania quarterback, he had co-founded the Philadelphia Eagles in 1933 after purchasing the bankrupt Frankfurt Yellow Jackets franchise for a mere $2,500. He coached the team himself with little success. The Eagles were terrible and Bell was losing money. He witnessed firsthand the drain of talent. A player like Alabama's star end, Don Hutson, could ignite a bidding war. In 1935, Hutson signed with both the Green Bay Packers and the Brooklyn Dodgers. The league commissioner had to flip a coin to decide his destination. Green Bay won the toss, and Hutson became a legend for the Packers. For Bell, this was no way to run a business. It was chaos. It was expensive. And it meant that a bad team like his Eagles had no systematic way to improve. They couldn't just draft a better player. They had to outbid everyone for him, and they lacked the resources to do so. The system was designed to perpetuate failure for the have-nots. Bell's genius was not in accepting this reality, but in engineering an alternative reality altogether. He proposed a radical collectivization of talent. The concept was stark in its simplicity and breathtaking in its audacity. At a league meeting in 1935, Bell, frustrated by the bidding wars, laid out his vision. He called for an annual pooling of eligible college players. The team with the worst record from the previous season would get the first pick. Then the second worst, and so on down to the league champion. Each team would have exclusive, and crucially non-competitive, negotiating rights with the player it selected. If the player refused to sign with that team, he could not sign with any other NFL team. His alternative was to find another line of work. This was not a suggestion for improving competitive balance in the spirit of sport. It was a blueprint for a monopsony. It was a formal agreement among competitors to cease competing for raw materials. In any other industry, steel, automobiles, agriculture, such a scheme would have been a prima facie violation of the Sherman Antitrust Act. But professional football in 1935 existed in a legal and cultural blind spot. It was considered a sport, a pastime, not interstate commerce of significant magnitude. The owners were not seen as industrialists colluding to fix prices. They were seen as sportsmen trying to keep their teams afloat. This perception was the first and most vital legal loophole. The law simply wasn't looking. On May 19, 1936, at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Philadelphia, the NFL owners made it official. The atmosphere was one of business, not ceremony. There was no television coverage, no cheering fans, no prospects waiting in a green room. The owners and a few league officials gathered in a meeting room. The draft was a functional affair, a piece of administrative housekeeping. The first selection was recorded not with a theatrical announcement, but likely with a note in a ledger. The first ever NFL draft pick was Jay Berwanger, a phenomenal halfback from the University of Chicago who had just won the inaugural Heisman Trophy. The selection was made by the Philadelphia Eagles, but Bell, in a move that spoke to the draft's true purpose as an asset management tool, had already traded Berwanger's rights to the Chicago Bears. Berwanger never played a down in the NFL. He found the Bears' offer insufficient and chose a career in the rubber industry. The second pick, Riley Smith, signed with the Boston Redskins. And so it went. 90 names were selected that day. Many never played. The mechanism was crude, but it worked. The bidding wars were over. The cost of acquiring talent was instantly capped. The players' leverage had vanished. The legal environment of the 1930s was uniquely permissive for this kind of collusion. The country was in the depths of the Great Depression. The political and judicial focus was on stabilizing industries, preventing cutthroat competition that could lead to total collapse. While the Sherman Act was the law of the land, its enforcement was nuanced. The Supreme Court had begun to develop the rule of reason, which held that not every restraint of trade was illegal, only those that were unreasonable. A group of football owners arguing that their draft was necessary to ensure the survival of their teams and the competitive balance of their league could, at the time, make a plausible case for reasonableness. Furthermore, professional sports occupied a nebulous space in American jurisprudence. The precedent for exemption was being set in baseball. In 1922, the Supreme Court had ruled in Federal Baseball Club versus National League that baseball was not interstate commerce, but rather a series of local exhibitions, and thus was exempt from federal antitrust law. This was a legal fiction of monumental proportions, but it created a shadow under which other leagues could operate. Though the NFL would not be granted the same blanket exemption, the federal baseball case sent a powerful message. The courts were hesitant to intervene in the business of baseball, and by extension, perhaps the business of sport. Bert Bell and his colleagues were not lawyers, but they were practical men. They sensed this hesitancy. They moved into the gray area and built a fortress. The immediate effect of the draft was precisely what Bell had hoped for. It introduced a forced, artificial parity. The worst teams got access to the best incoming talent at a controlled price. It prevented wealthier teams from hoarding stars straight out of college. It made franchise ownership a more stable and thus more attractive investment. The draft was a welfare system for owners, but to justify it to the public and to themselves, a new language had to be crafted. The draft was not about control or cost containment. It was about competitive balance. It was about giving every team a chance. It was about the health of the league. This rhetorical shift was masterful. It framed a blatantly anti-competitive, anti-labor practice as a pro-competitive, pro-fan necessity. The league was not suppressing wages. It was ensuring that Green Bay could compete with New York. The players' loss of freedom was the fans' gain in suspense. This narrative would become the bedrock of the NFL's defense for decades to come. The draft was the clever, benign mechanism that kept the league interesting. Who could argue with that? But beneath the surface, the foundational truth remained. The 1936 draft was a contract among competitors to not compete. It was a group boycott of the player labor market. Bert Bell, the struggling owner, had solved his problem. He had externalized the cost of competitive balance onto the backs of the players. They would pay for the league's stability with their diminished bargaining power. The system was born not from malice, but from cold, collective self-interest. It was a business decision, one that would generate unimaginable wealth for the owners over the coming century. The first loop had been closed. The player was now bound at the point of entry, but Bell's brainchild only captured the player at the beginning of his career. A new question immediately presented itself. What happened when that first contract ended? How could the league prevent a player, once seasoned and proven, from finally testing the free market? The draft was the hook. To complete the capture, the league would need to invent a net that could hold a man for the entirety of his professional life. The answer would not come from a hotel ballroom, but from the boilerplate language of a standard player contract, and it would be enforced with such draconian power that it would become known simply by the name of the man who wielded it. Bert Bell's draft was a masterstroke of capture, but it was only the beginning of the confinement. The draft seized a player at the border the moment he sought entry into the professional realm. But what happened once he was inside? A rookie contract might last for a season, maybe two. When it expired, the principles of a free market would suggest that the player, now a proven commodity, should be able to sell his services to the highest bidder. This was the dangerous frontier the NFL owners foresaw. Allowing that would unravel the control they had just established. The draft would become merely a temporary holding cell if a player could walk to a rival after proving his worth. To complete the system, to build a true monopsony, they needed a mechanism that bound a man not just at the start of his career, but for its entirety. They needed a forever chain. They found it not in a dramatic rule, but in the cold, boilerplate language of the standard player contract, and they enforced it with a provision that came to bear the name of the league's most powerful commissioner, the Roselle Rule. The foundation was the option clause. Nestled within the uniform contract every drafted player signed was a simple, devastating paragraph. It stated that upon the expiration of the contract, the club had the option to renew it for a further term, at a salary no less than 90% of the previous year's pay. This was not an option in any negotiable sense. It was a unilateral right. If the team exercised this option, and they always did, the player was bound for another year. And at the end of that option year, the clause reset. This created a cycle of perpetual renewal. A player never played out his contract. He played out a series of one-year options, all controlled by the club. He could not leave. He could not demand a trade. He could not test the market. His rights were owned in perpetuity by the team that drafted him or the team to which he was traded. This was the reserve clause, and it turned a contract from an agreement into a life sentence. The player's only leverage was to hold out, to refuse to play. But this was a weapon of desperation, costing the player's salary, incurring the wrath of fans and media, and with no guarantee of freedom at the end. Most players, reliant on their football income, submitted. But the system required a deterrent for the rare owner who might test its boundaries. What if, in a fit of rebellion or strategic calculation, an owner decided to sign another team's player whose option had been exercised? This was the loophole that could break the cartel. The league's solution was a mechanism of terrifying and arbitrary power, formalized in the 1960s under Commissioner Pete Rozelle. It was known as the Rozelle Rule. The rule stated that if a player whose contract had expired after the option year signed with a new team, the commissioner had the unilateral authority to determine what compensation the new team owed to the old team. The compensation was not predefined. It was not limited to draft picks. Rozelle could and did award multiple veteran players and high draft choices. The compensation was designed to be so severe, so punitive, that it would deter any team from even attempting to sign another club's free agent. It made the cost of acquiring a player prohibitive. In practice, the Rozelle Rule meant there was no free agency. There was only a minefield. The effect was to eliminate the market completely. A player like a star linebacker for the Cleveland Browns might wish to play for the Los Angeles Rams. Even if the Rams were willing to pay him far more, they would not dare make an offer, knowing that Commissioner Rozelle could strip them of their next 2 first-round draft picks and a starting quarterback as compensation. The threat was existential. It froze movement. It made the player's desire irrelevant. The Rozelle Rule was the enforcement arm of the reserve clause, a judicial system with one judge, jury, and executioner, all embodied in the commissioner's office. It transformed the league from a collection of competing businesses into a single, unified entity with absolute control over the allocation and pricing of labor. The draft dictated where you started. The reserve clause and the Rozelle Rule dictated where you finished. This system created a profound psychological and economic reality for the player. From the moment he was drafted, he understood that his destiny was not his own. He could be traded at any time without his consent to any city for any reason, but he could never choose to leave. This lack of agency bred a deep-seated sense of powerlessness. It also ensured that salaries remained artificially suppressed. With no competitive bidding, a player's salary was not a reflection of his market value, but of what his single, monopsonistic employer decided he was worth, balanced against the faint threat of a holdout. There were no benchmarks, no comparisons, because there was no true market. The owner held all the cards, the exclusive rights to the player's labor, and the league-backed power to crush any potential bidder. The public justification for this draconian system was, once again, competitive balance. The league argued that without the reserve clause and the Rozelle Rule, wealthy, glamorous teams would hoard all the stars, and small market teams would become permanent farm clubs. It was the same argument used for the draft extended across a career. The logic was seductive in its simplicity, and it was accepted by much of the media and public for generations. But a closer examination reveals its flaw. The system did not create competitive balance. It created competitive stasis. It prevented dynasties from buying talent, but it also condemned great players to permanent residence on bad teams. It didn't balance competition. It immobilized the competitors. A player's fate was sealed by the drafting acumen and management skill, or lack thereof, of a single franchise. There was no escape valve, no mechanism for a player to seek a better situation, to chase a championship, or to simply be valued at his worth. His career was a monogamous marriage arranged at birth, with no possibility of divorce. The human cost of this forever chain was immense, though often quiet. Players played through injury, knowing their team could replace them without recourse. They accepted salaries far below what an open market might bear, knowing they had no alternative employer. They uprooted families on a moment's notice when traded, but could never choose to uproot themselves for a better opportunity. The system bred resentment, but it also bred a fatalistic acceptance. This was just the way it was. The NFL had successfully naturalized its control. The draft was the welcome ceremony. The reserve clause was the citizenship that could never be revoked. And the Roselle Rule was the border patrol that ensured no one could leave, and no one from the outside could offer asylum. But no wall, no matter how high, can withstand the pressure of a singular, defiant force. The legal foundation of this forever chain was about to be questioned not by a labor movement, but by an individual who embodied the very spirit of stubborn, violent independence the league celebrated on the field. He was a quarterback who refused to be property. His name was Joe Kapp, and his lawsuit would not just challenge a contract. It would put the Roselle Rule itself on trial, aiming a legal hammer directly at the most powerful link in the chain. The sound of that impact would echo through every front office in the league, signaling that the era of silent compliance was over, and the age of legal reckoning had begun. The victories of Joe Kapp and John Mackey in federal court sent a seismic shock through the NFL's executive suites. For decades, the league's control mechanisms, the draft, the Roselle Rule, had been justified by a vague appeal to competitive balance and the unique nature of sports. But in the cold, logical light of antitrust law, they had been found wanting. They were, as the judges ruled, unreasonable restraints of trade. The walls that Bert Bell had built were cracking. The league faced an existential choice. Either dismantle its system of control and embrace a true free market for player talent, or find a new, more formidable legal fortress from which to defend it. They chose the latter. They would not abandon the draft. They would find a way to make it untouchable. Their salvation would not come from rewriting their own rules, but from exploiting a profound and complex legal principle that had been developing in the shadow of American labor law, the non-statutory labor exemption. This would become the league's get-out-of-jail-free card, a shield so powerful it could render antitrust law, the very force that had just wounded them, completely inert. To understand the non-statutory labor exemption, you must first understand the tension between two pillars of American law, antitrust law and labor law. Antitrust law, embodied by the Sherman Act, exists to promote competition. It is suspicious of agreements among competitors that restrain trade, like, for example, a group of team owners agreeing not to bid against each other for rookie talent. Labor law, on the other hand, exists to promote collective bargaining. It protects the right of workers to unite, form a union, and negotiate as a single entity with their employer over wages, hours, and working conditions. Collective bargaining, by its very nature, involves restraints on trade. A union negotiates a single wage scale, eliminating individual bidding for labor. It negotiates uniform rules that apply to all workers. In most industries, this tension is minimal because the employer is a single entity. But in a sports league, the employer is a collection of separate, competing businesses, the teams. When those teams, through their league, negotiate with a union, they are essentially a multi-employer bargaining unit. The question becomes, when this group of competitors agrees with a union on certain restraints like a draft or free agency rules, are they violating antitrust law by conspiring to restrain the labor market? Or are they protected by labor law because they are engaging in good faith collective bargaining? The non-statutory labor exemption is the judicial answer to that question. It is called non-statutory because it was not written by Congress. It was crafted by the Supreme Court piece by piece through a series of rulings in the mid-20th century. The exemption essentially states that when a restraint on trade, like the NFL draft, is the product of bona fide, arm's-length collective bargaining between a union and a multi-employer group, and when it primarily affects only the parties to that bargaining agreement, it is exempt from challenge under the antitrust laws. The logic is that labor policy, which favors collective bargaining, should trump antitrust policy in this specific context. The court decided that it would not allow antitrust law to be used as a weapon to sabotage the collective bargaining process. This exemption became the holy grail for professional sports leagues. It was the legal alchemy that could transform an illegal conspiracy into a protected contractual provision. For the NFL, Reeling from the Mackey decision, the path forward was now clear, and it was a path of breathtaking cynicism. They had lost in court because their restraints were unilaterally imposed by the owners, a clear antitrust violation. The solution was to no longer impose them unilaterally. The solution was to get the players, through their union, to agree to them. If the NFL Players Association would sit down at the bargaining table and collectively agree to a draft, then that draft would be cloaked in the protective armor of the non-statutory labor exemption. It would no longer be an owner conspiracy. It would be a product of labor management negotiation. The league's strategy inverted the entire dynamic. They were no longer defending the draft as essential for the sport. They were now working to make the draft essential for the collective bargaining agreement. They needed the union to want it, or at least to accept it as a bargaining chip. This led to a period of intense, often brutal negotiation throughout the 1970s and 80s. The league's offer was a simple quid pro quo, but it was a deal with the devil. The owner's position was this: *U, the union want free agency. You want the right for veterans to sell their services on the open market. We will give you a form of free agency. But in return, you must give us your explicit agreement to keep the draft and to accept a new set of rules that will govern and restrict that free agency. The players were in a desperate bind. They wanted the tangible, immediate benefit of mobility and market value salaries that free agency promised. To get it, they were being asked to sanction the very system that bound them at the start of their careers and to agree to new restraints that would limit their freedom at the end. It was a devil's bargain. Sell your future rights to liberate your present ones. Sell the rights of the next generation of players to secure benefits for the current one. The culmination of this strategy was the 1993 collective bargaining agreement. This was the watershed moment. After years of litigation, strikes, and acrimony, the NFLPA, under new leadership and exhausted from a failed antitrust lawsuit of its own, sat down and cut a deal. In that CBA, the players formally agreed to the continuation of the college draft. More importantly, they agreed to a new, complex system of free agency that was, in reality, a highly restricted and managed market. It included a salary cap, franchise and transition tags, and various designations that gave teams extended control over players. By signing that agreement, the NFLPA performed a profound act of legal jiu-jitsu on behalf of the owners. They took the draft, Bert Bell's brainchild, already ruled an antitrust violation in Mackey, and they placed it safely inside the fortress of the labor exemption. They did the same for the new restrictive free agency system. The loophole was now sealed shut from the inside. The implications of this are staggering. It means that the draft, as it exists today, is virtually immune from legal challenge. A player cannot sue the league, claiming the draft is an antitrust violation, because the draft is a product of the collective bargaining agreement. His recourse is not to the courts, but to the negotiating table through his union. The non-statutory labor exemption created a closed loop. It made the players complicit in their own constraint. The owners had achieved through negotiation what they could not defend in litigation: permanent, legally sanctified control over the entry point of labor. The exemption is the ultimate regulatory capture. It allowed the industry to write its own rules, to opt out of the fundamental laws of the American marketplace, under the guise of collective bargaining. The free in free agency was always in quotation marks. The market was, and is, meticulously engineered. The draft is its founding pillar, and the labor exemption is the constitutional amendment that made it untouchable. This legal shield also explains the peculiar, often strained relationship between the NFL and its players' union. Every negotiation, every collective bargaining cycle is not just about salaries and benefits. It is, at its core, a re-ratification of the league's right to operate a monopsony. The owners must keep the union alive and at the table, because the union's agreement is the source of their antitrust immunity. This creates a perverse symbiosis. It is why the league would never truly seek to decertify the union, and why the union's most powerful weapon, threatening to decertify and sue under antitrust law, is a nuclear option that risks everything. The entire economic model rests on this delicate, adversarial partnership. The labor exemption turned the players' collective voice from a weapon of liberation into a necessary component of the control mechanism itself. So, the next time you watch the draft, understand what you are seeing. You are not watching a simple sporting procedure. You are watching the annual enactment of a legally privileged system. The pomp, the ceremony, the tension, it all plays out under the invisible but inviolable dome of the non-statutory labor exemption. The owners are not just selecting players. They are exercising a right granted to them not by God or sport, but by a complex legal deal cut with the very men it binds. The draft is legal because the players agreed it could be. And they agreed because, in the calculus of collective bargaining, it was the price for something else. This is the true architecture of control. The walls are not made of stone, but of paragraphs and subsections, of legal precedents and negotiated concessions. The founders of the league built a simple fence. Their successors, through legal ingenuity and hard bargaining, turned it into a sovereign nation with its own laws. But this nation was built on a bargain that left some of its citizens fundamentally unfree. And soon, a citizen would arrive who refused to recognize its authority. He would not sue over the draft itself, but over the perpetual chains that followed him long after his name was called. His name was Joe Kapp, and his defiance would strike the first, resounding crack in the fortress wall, a crack that would force the league to seek the very exemption that now defines it. For decades, the NFL's control apparatus operated with the quiet authority of a natural law. The draft captured a player. The standard contract and the Rozelle rule held him. The system was presented not as a choice, but as a condition of existence. To play professional football was to accept these chains. Most players did, grumbling but compliant. They were football players, not revolutionaries. But in the late 1960s, a man arrived who was constitutionally incapable of accepting conditions. He was a quarterback, but not a traditional one. He was a battering ram with a throwing arm, a leader who played with a ferocity that bordered on fury. His name was Joe Kapp, and he did not believe in belonging to anyone. His journey through professional football and his subsequent collision with the league's power structure would not just challenge the system, it would put it on trial and win. Kapp v. National Football League would become the first successful antitrust attack on the NFL's reserve system, a crack in the fortress wall so profound it would force the league to fundamentally rethink its entire defense. Joe Kapp's story begins outside the NFL's jurisdiction, in the Canadian Football League. He led the BC Lions to a Grey Cup and built a reputation as the toughest, most charismatic player in the game. In 1967, the Minnesota Vikings of the NFL, seeking a franchise quarterback, negotiated with the Lions for Kapp's rights, but Kapp himself refused to sign a standard NFL contract. He found its terms, particularly the clause that bound him to the Vikings in perpetuity, to be offensive. He was not a piece of property to be traded. After a standoff, a unique one-year personal services contract was hammered out. It was a precursor to the modern deal, lacking the standard option clause that automatically renewed a team's rights. Kapp played, and he played brilliantly. In 1969, he led the Vikings to the Super Bowl, famously declaring, 40 men for 60 minutes. He was the embodiment of the team concept. But his individual concept was one of radical self-ownership. When his contract expired after the 1969 season, the Vikings, operating under the standard assumption of the Rozelle rule, expected to simply renew his rights. Kapp refused. He was a free agent. He believed his contract was over, and he was free to negotiate with any team. The NFL's response was swift and condescending. They informed Kapp and any team interested in him that he was still the property of the Minnesota Vikings. If any other team signed him, they would face crippling compensation demands from Commissioner Pete Rozelle. This was the Rozelle rule in action, a mechanism designed to stifle free agency by making it punitively expensive. Kapp was not just being blocked, he was being told he did not own his own labor. His response was pure Kapp. He sued. In 1970, he filed an antitrust lawsuit against the National Football League, alleging that the draft, the standard player contract, and the Rozelle rule constituted an illegal group boycott and a conspiracy in restraint of trade. He wasn't just asking for the right to play. He was asking the court to declare the very foundation of the NFL's labor system unlawful. The case, Kapp v. NFL, landed in the courtroom of U.S. District Judge William T. Swigert in San Francisco. The league mounted its classic defense. They argued that these restraints were essential for competitive balance. They argued that without them, the rich teams would hoard all the talent and the league would collapse. They argued that professional football was a unique business requiring unique rules. They presented the system as a benign necessity. Kapp's legal team, led by the brilliant and relentless attorney Maxwell Blecker, attacked this premise head-on. They argued that the system was not about balance, but about control and cost suppression. They argued that it was a naked conspiracy among competitors to eliminate the market for player services. They put the NFL on trial as a business, not a sport. Judge Swigert's ruling, issued in 1974, was a thunderbolt. He systematically dismantled the NFL's arguments. He found that the league's practices, particularly the Rozelle Rule and the system of perpetual renewal, were indeed unreasonable restraints of trade in violation of the Sherman Act. He rejected the notion that the survival of the league depended on owning players in perpetuity. He wrote, "The NFL's argument that the restrictions are necessary for survival seems exaggerated. Other leagues have survived without such restrictions." He pointed to the American Football League, which had operated with a less restrictive system and still competed effectively. Judge Swigert saw through the rhetoric of competitive balance to the economic reality beneath. He recognized that the system's primary effect was to depress player salaries and eliminate their mobility. It was a victory of staggering proportions. For the first time, a federal court had looked at the NFL's labor model and declared it illegal. The immediate aftermath was chaos, but a chaos contained within the league's power to maneuver. Kapp was technically a free agent. He signed with the New England Patriots for the 1974 season, but the legal victory was personal and pyrrhic. His skills had diminished, his body battered from his punishing style of play. His season in New England was unsuccessful and he retired. The league, however, was left with a legal crisis. The ruling in Kapp was a direct threat to the entire reserve clause system. But the NFL had resources and legal strategies that Kapp, as an individual, did not. They appealed. And while the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals would later uphold much of Swigert's reasoning regarding the Rozelle Rule, the practical impact was blunted by time, legal procedure, and the league's next moves. The true legacy of Kapp v. NFL was not in freeing Joe Kapp. It was in exposing the vulnerability of the league's antitrust position. The crack in the wall was now visible to every player, every agent, and most importantly, to the NFL Players Association. The league could no longer rely on the passive acceptance of its system. The judicial skepticism was now on the record. The Kapp case provided the legal blueprint, the argumentative roadmap, for a more systemic attack. It demonstrated that the Rozelle Rule, the linchpin of perpetual control, could be defeated in court. It shifted the burden onto the NFL to prove the necessity of its restraints, a burden they were now struggling to bear. In response to the Kapp decision, the league engaged in a two-pronged strategy of delay and evolution. The first was political. They began a concerted lobbying effort, arguing to Congress that professional football needed a limited antitrust exemption to preserve competitive balance. They sought to have their system legitimized by statute, to close the crack with an act of Congress. This effort would ultimately fail, but it showed the league's willingness to move the battle from the courtroom to the halls of power. The second and more consequential strategy was legal and practical. They began to modify the system at the edges, preparing for a future where the Rozelle Rule might not survive. They implemented Plan B free agency and other minor modifications, all designed to create a veneer of change while maintaining core control. More importantly, they started to eye the collective bargaining agreement not just as a labor contract, but as a potential legal life raft. The Kapp decision made it clear that unilateral owner-imposed rules were vulnerable. The solution, they realized, might be to make the rules bilateral. Joe Kapp faded from the game, a folk hero to some, a troublesome iconoclast to others. But the crack he made did not heal. It widened. Emboldened by his victory, the NFL Players Association, under the leadership of its president, Hall of Fame tight end John Mackey, prepared its own, broader assault. They would not challenge the system on behalf of one defiant quarterback. but on behalf of every player bound by it. They would file a class action antitrust lawsuit targeting the Roselle Rule directly, seeking not just individual freedom, but a declaration that would shatter the system for everyone. Kapp had proven the wall could be cracked. Mackey v. NFL would aim to bring it down entirely. The league, now on high alert, knew it was in a fight for its economic soul. The age of legal unquestioning was over. The age of the exemption was about to begin. The crack Joe Kapp had made in the NFL's fortress was a narrow one, personal and specific. But it let in a sliver of light, and in that light, the Players' Union saw a path to demolition. The NFL Players Association, led by its president, the charismatic and intelligent Hall of Fame tight end John Mackey, understood that Kapp's victory was a blueprint, not a conclusion. Kapp had challenged the system as an individual and won on narrow grounds. Mackey and the union would mount a broader, more systematic attack. They would not sue for one man's freedom. They would file a class action lawsuit on behalf of every player bound by the Roselle Rule. Their goal was not to win a settlement, but to win a declaration from the courts that the rule itself was an illegal restraint of trade. Mackey v. National Football League would become the most significant legal challenge to the league's power structure in its history. It would deliver a victory so complete it would seem to shatter the old system forever. But in the complex algebra of sports law, winning the legal battle would set the stage for a profound strategic defeat. The victory in court would force the league to seek sanctuary in a new, more impregnable fortress: the collective bargaining agreement. John Mackey was an unlikely revolutionary. He was a star, a key component of the legendary Baltimore Colts teams, a player who revolutionized the tight end position with a combination of power and speed that seemed unfair. He was respected, even beloved, by the establishment. But Mackey possessed a sharp mind and a deep sense of responsibility to his fellow players. He saw the injustice of the Roselle Rule not as an abstract legal concept, but as a daily reality. He watched teammates trapped, underpaid, and traded like cattle. When he became president of the NFLPA in 1970, he transformed it from a passive fraternity into an activist organization. His first major act was to authorize the landmark lawsuit. The union's argument was a direct escalation of Kapp's. The Roselle Rule, by giving the commissioner arbitrary power to impose crippling compensation for signing a free agent, was a naked group boycott. It was a conspiracy among the teams to eliminate the market for veteran player services entirely. It was the enforcement mechanism of the Perpetual Reserve Clause, and it was a blatant violation of the Sherman Antitrust Act. The case wound its way through the legal system for years, a marathon of filings, depositions, and delays. The league deployed its familiar defenses: competitive balance, the unique nature of the sports business, the necessity of the rule for league stability. But the legal landscape had shifted since the early days of Bert Bell. Courts were increasingly skeptical of such broad claims of exemption. In 1976, the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals delivered its verdict. It was a stunning, unambiguous victory for Mackey and the players. The court ruled that the Roselle Rule was indeed an unreasonable restraint of trade. It rejected the NFL's argument that the rule was essential for competitive balance, noting that the league had failed to prove that less restrictive alternatives would not suffice. The court wrote that the rule virtually eliminates free agency and was patently unreasonable in its effect. The Roselle Rule, the mighty enforcement arm of the forever chain, was struck down. The Perpetual Reserve Clause system in its classic form was dead. The immediate reaction among players was euphoria. They had slain the dragon. The legal ruling meant that a true free agency, a market for veteran players, was now a possibility. For the first time, a player could realistically envision playing out his contract and choosing his next destination. John Mackey was hailed as a hero, but the celebration was premature. The NFL, though wounded, was far from defeated. They had lost a central pillar of their control system in the courtroom, but they now pivoted with cold precision to a new arena of control: the negotiating table. The decision created a legal vacuum, but it did not create free agency. It simply removed the illegal barrier. The league now needed to build a new legal barrier. Their strategy would be one of brilliant co-option. The league's lawyers and negotiators realized that the vulnerability of the Roselle Rule stemmed from its origin. It was a unilateral decree by the owners. It was a group boycott because it was imposed by the group. But what if the restraints were not imposed, but agreed to? What if the players, through their union, collectively bargained for a system that included restrictions on free agency? This was the genesis of the modern NFL economic model. The owners understood that the non-statutory labor exemption, that get-out-of-jail-free card, could protect restraints that were collectively bargained. The defeat in Mackey made collective bargaining not just a labor relations tool, but a legal survival strategy. They would offer the players a form of free agency, but in return, the players would have to sanction a new set of rules governing that freedom. They would trade the illegal Roselle Rule for a legal, collectively bargained maze. Thus began a long, tortuous period of negotiation, strike, and litigation that stretched through the late 1970s and 1980s. The owners' position was a masterclass in realpolitik. Their message to the union was, "You won in court. You have the right to free agency. But if you try to exercise that right under the current void, we will fight you in every instance with every resource. We will create new, interim systems that are only slightly less restrictive. We will lock you out. We will break your strike. Or you can sit down with us and negotiate a system. You can have free agency, but we will define its terms. And in return for defining those terms, you will give us your explicit agreement to keep the draft and to accept limits on when and how a player becomes free." It was an offer the players could not refuse because the alternative was a state of perpetual, chaotic war that the wealthier owners knew they could outlast. John Mackey's legal victory had, paradoxically, put the union in a weaker bargaining position. They had the moral and legal high ground, but the owners held the economic fortresses. The players' dream of a true, unfettered free market, the kind that existed for actors or musicians, collided with the owners' absolute refusal to allow it. The negotiations that followed were not about whether to have controls, but about what kind of controls to have. The discussion shifted from, "Is this legal?" to, "What are the terms?" This was the ultimate victory for the league. They had moved the battlefield from the vulnerable territory of antitrust law to the protected territory of labor law. Mackey had won the battle to destroy the old, illegal system. In doing so, he forced the league to build a new one that would be far harder to challenge. John Mackey's own post-football life became a tragic coda to his victory. He suffered from dementia, likely stemming from CTE, and died in 2011. His name is immortalized on the award given to the league's best tight end, and in the legal citation that changed professional sports. But the system that bears the imprint of his lawsuit is not the free one he fought for. The 1993 collective bargaining agreement, which finally established a formal free agency system, was the direct descendant of the Mackey decision. It was the treaty that ended the war, but on terms that permanently encoded owner control into a legally sanctioned contract. The draft remained, now sheltered by the labor exemption. The Roselle Rule was replaced by the franchise tag, transition tag, and a Byzantine set of eligibility rules for free agency that still restricted movement. The players got mobility, but within a fenced pasture. They got market value, but within a salary-capped ecosystem. Mackey had broken the forever chain, but in its place, the league and the union collaboratively built a labyrinth with a single, heavily guarded exit. The war for liberation had ended in a negotiated settlement that legitimized the very concept of containment. The next great battle would not be in court, but across the bargaining table, where the owners would seek to use the players' own collective voice to ratify a new, even more sophisticated mechanism for controlling the most expensive talent, the rookie. The decade following the Mackey decision was a state of Cold War, a phony peace punctuated by strikes, lockouts, and legal skirmishes. The players had won the law, but the owners still held the field. The Roselle Rule was gone, but in its place was a void, a chaotic, undefined landscape where free agency was a legal right but a practical impossibility, blocked by owner collusion, Plan B free agency, and the sheer, overwhelming will of the NFL establishment. The union, led by Gene Upshaw after Mackey, was exhausted. They had struck in 1982 and 1987, and both strikes had failed. players crossed picket lines, the public largely sided with the owners, and the league simply waited them out. By the early 1990s, the NFLPA was decertified as a union, a desperate gambit to sue the league under antitrust law once more, free from the constraints of labor negotiation. This lawsuit, led by a group of star players including Freeman McNeil, was grinding through the courts. But the outcome was uncertain, the costs were astronomical, and the weariness was universal. Into this stalemate stepped a new commissioner, Paul Tagliabue, and a moment ripe for a grand bargain. The 1993 collective bargaining agreement would not be a peace treaty between equals. It would be the document that codified the owner's strategic retreat from antitrust vulnerability into the ironclad security of labor law. It was the act of baking the loophole into the very cake of the sport. The negotiations that led to the 1993 CBA were a complex dance of mutual desperation. But the owners held the better cards. They wanted finality, a legal end to the antitrust wars. The players wanted a tangible share of the league's exploding television revenues and a real path to free agency. Tagliabue and a cadre of savvy owners, led by the Cowboys' Jerry Jones and the Steelers' Dan Rooney, saw an opportunity. They would give the players a form of free agency and a direct percentage of league revenues. The salary cap was born from this trade, but they would demand a price that would secure their control for generations. The price was explicit written consent. The union would have to recertify, and in recertifying and signing the CBA, the NFLPA would explicitly agree to two things: the continuation of the college draft and a new restrictive system of free agency that would be defined and limited by the agreement itself. This was the masterstroke. It moved the entire economic model from the dangerous realm of antitrust law, where it had been losing, into the safe harbor of labor law's non-statutory exemption. Let us be clear about what happened in 1993. The NFL did not simply negotiate a labor deal, conducted a legal transplant. The draft, Bert Bell's creation, which had been found to be an unreasonable restraint of trade in the Mackey litigation, was surgically removed from the vulnerable body of unilateral owner policy and grafted into the protected body of the collective bargaining agreement. Once the union agreed to it, the draft was no longer an owner conspiracy. It was a mandatory subject of bargaining that had been bargained. It became part of the labor market rules agreed upon by both sides. A player could no longer sue to challenge the draft as an antitrust violation. His only recourse was to challenge his own union for bargaining it in bad faith, an almost impossible legal task. The draft was sanctified. It was made untouchable. Simultaneously, the CBA didn't just create free agency. It created defined free agency. It erected a new fence around the open field the courts had theoretically granted. A player would not become a free agent simply by playing out his contract. He had to accrue 4 or 5 years of service time. Then, and only then, could he test the market, but within strict limits. The system included the franchise tag, a direct, if slightly more limited, descendant of the Rozelle rule that allowed a team to retain one star player indefinitely by offering a top salary but denying him the right to leave. It included the transition tag. It included a hard salary cap that limited total spending, ensuring that the new player mobility wouldn't lead to a bidding war that hurt owner profits. This wasn't the destruction of the old system. It was its reformation under a new constitution. The perpetual control of the reserve clause was replaced by a delayed and regulated mobility. The draft remained the unassailable gatekeeper. The owners had given up the right to own a man forever, but in exchange, they had gained the legal right to own his first 4 to 5 years absolutely, and to control the terms of his freedom thereafter. They had traded a dictatorship for a constitutional republic where they wrote the Constitution. The public and media narrative celebrated the 1993 CBA as a great step forward, a compromise that saved the sport. And in many ways, it did. It brought labor peace, revenue sharing, and a parity that fueled the NFL's astronomical growth. But this narrative obscured the profound legal surrender it contained. The players gained a share of revenue and a measure of freedom, but they legitimized the underlying control mechanism. They traded a legal right, the right to challenge the system in court, for an economic benefit. It was a pragmatic choice, perhaps the only one available to a weakened union. but its consequence was to make the draft and the restrictive free agency system immune from the very antitrust laws designed to prevent such cartel behavior. The loophole was no longer a crack in the wall. It was the foundation of the house. The 1993 agreement set the template for all future CBAs. Every negotiation since 2006, 2011, 2020 has been a renegotiation of the terms of this foundational trade-off. Player revenue share in exchange for the legal sanctification of owner control systems. Each time, the draft is reaffirmed. Each time, the restrictions on free agency are tweaked, but never abandoned. The non-statutory labor exemption, invoked by the owner's strategic use of the CBA, hangs over every discussion. The players can bargain for a larger slice of the pie, or for slight modifications to the franchise tag, but they cannot, at the bargaining table, legally demand the abolition of the draft or a truly free market without triggering a nuclear war that would decertify the union and plunge them back into the uncertain waters of antitrust litigation. The 1993 deal built a cage of gold, but it was still a cage. The owners had successfully transformed their greatest vulnerability into their greatest strength. They had turned the players' collective voice into the legal instrument of their own confinement. And with this new, unassailable system in place, they would soon turn their attention to a final frontier of cost control. The very first contract, the rookie wage scale, where they would use the public's perception and the union's own internal politics to enact one of the most one-sided provisions in professional sports. To view the NFL draft as a sporting event is to fundamentally misunderstand its primary function. It is a spectacle, yes. It is a narrative engine. But beneath the theater lies a cold, transactional core. Economists have a term for what happens in that green room and on that stage. It is a monopsonistic labor auction with prefix prices. In plainer language, it is a legally sanctioned form of collusion designed to suppress wages. The draft is not merely a system for allocating talent. It is the most effective price-fixing mechanism in American professional sports. It is a case study in how to eliminate competition for a resource in order to control its cost. To understand the true value extracted by this system, we must perform a simple, though startling, thought experiment. What would the first pick in the NFL draft be worth in a truly free market? Consider the premier asset in any given draft year. In 2020, it was quarterback Joe Burrow. In a free market, Joe Burrow, the Heisman Trophy winner, national champion, and generational quarterback prospect, would have been a free agent upon leaving LSU. Every NFL team with a need at quarterback, a list encompassing perhaps 25 franchises, would have been able to make him an offer. The bidding would have been historic. Teams like the Cincinnati Bengals, who held the first pick, would have had to compete not only with other struggling teams, but with perennial contenders who could offer immediate championship prospects and lucrative market opportunities. The final contract would not have been a slot number dictated by a collective bargaining agreement. It would have been a record-shattering figure, likely exceeding the total value of the entire rookie wage pool for that year. It might have approached or even surpassed the contracts of established elite veterans like Patrick Mahomes. The market would have determined that a 23-year-old franchise quarterback with no injury history and a decade of potential prime years is the most valuable commodity in the sport. But that is not what happened. Because of the draft, Burrow's market was not the NFL. It was a single room with one occupant, the Cincinnati Bengals. His leverage was not the demand of 32 teams, but his willingness to not play football for a year. The result was a contract that, while massive by normal standards, was a fraction of what a true open auction would have yielded. The difference between that theoretical free market value and his actual draft-mandated contract is the monopsony rent extracted by the system. It is wealth transferred directly from the player to the owners. This is not a hypothetical. Economists have studied this for decades. The seminal work comes from the Rottenberg theorem, articulated by Simon Rottenberg in 1956, which posited that in a free market, talent would flow to its highest valued use, but that reserve clauses, and by extension drafts, prevent this redistributing wealth from players to owners. Later studies have quantified this. Research has shown that entry-level salaries in leagues with drafts and rookie scales are significantly lower than the estimated marginal revenue product of those players. That is, the revenue they actually generate for their teams. One study estimated that before the 2011 rookie wage scale, first-round picks were still underpaid relative to their performance value. but the scale dramatically increased the size of that underpayment. The draft doesn't just save owners money on rookies. It establishes a suppressed baseline for a player's entire career. A player's second contract is negotiated from the starting point of his artificially low first contract. The entire salary architecture of the league is built on this intentionally depressed foundation. The implementation of the rookie wage scale in the 2011 CBA is the starkest confession of this price-fixing motive. For years, owners and even some veteran players complained about overpaid rookies. The public narrative focused on Jamarcus Russell or Sam Bradford, high picks who signed enormous guarantees before proving anything. The solution, brokered in the 2011 lockout, was the rookie wage scale. It was presented as common sense. Why should unproven players make more than proven veterans? But this framing was a public relations triumph that masked an economic coup. The scale didn't just correct alleged overpayments. It institutionalized and standardized the underpayment of elite incoming talent. It took the already suppressed market of the draft and added a legislated price cap. Now, the cost of the first pick wasn't just limited by the lack of bidding. It was predetermined by a formula. The savings were immense and immediate. Overnight, the cost of top 5 picks plummeted by tens of millions of dollars. That money didn't vanish. It was redistributed, partly to veterans, as the owners promised, but largely back into the owners' pockets through increased profit margins and lower financial risk. The scale turned the draft from a collusive auction into a collusive auction with a strictly enforced price ceiling. The draft's price fixing extends beyond the first round. It suppresses value for every player. A talented wide receiver projected to go in the third round might, in an open market, attract significant interest from multiple teams running specific offensive schemes that value his skills. He could have a robust market. In the draft, he waits passively to be selected by one team at a slot value that bears no relation to the specific demand for his unique abilities. His salary is determined not by what teams are willing to pay for him, but by a preordained chart linked to his pick number. His individuality as a player is erased, replaced by a draft position. He is commoditized. The legal brilliance of the system is that this collusion is not secret. It is not a handshake agreement in a smoke-filled room. It is conducted in plain sight on national television, celebrated as a festival of hope. The collusion is baked into the collectively bargained rules, rendering it immune from antitrust scrutiny. The owners don't have to secretly agree not to bid against each other. The CBA does it for them, and the players' union has signed off on it. This is price fixing with a union label, a consensual suppression of the market. The draft is the ultimate example of regulatory capture, where the regulated industry writes the regulations that govern its acquisition of labor. It is a system that would be dismantled by the Department of Justice in any other sector of the economy. In professional football, it is the cornerstone of parity and the engine of financial predictability. The emotional narrative of the young man realizing his dream is the perfect camouflage for the financial narrative of a cartel efficiently allocating cheap labor. The tears in the green room are real. The billions saved by the owners in the boardroom are realer. And this system of control would soon face its greatest test not from a lawsuit, but from a rare class of assets so valuable that even the draft's rigid machinery could not contain its market force. The franchise quarterback who understood his own worth before he ever put on a hat. The NFL's draft system is a machine designed to process human capital with impersonal efficiency. It assumes compliance. It banks on the overwhelming power of the dream, the desire to play in the NFL at any cost. For 99% of drafted players, the calculus is simple. Accept the terms of the team that selects you because the alternative is oblivion. The system's awesome power is demonstrated not by the thousands who comply, but by the tiny, legendary few who do not. These are the exceptions that prove the absolute rule. They are the rare instances where the commodity being processed possesses such unique, undeniable value and such pre-existing leverage that it can momentarily jam the gears of the machine. The stories of John Elway in 1983 and Eli Manning in 2004 are not tales of player empowerment. They are case studies in the extreme, almost unimaginable pressure required to defy the draft's monopsony. They are narratives of power versus power, where the individual force is so great it can, for a moment, bend the institutional force field. And in doing so, they illuminate the crushing weight of that field on everyone else. In 1983, John Elway was more than a quarterback prospect. He was a cultural phenomenon. The Stanford star possessed a cannon arm, athletic genius, and the golden boy looks of a franchise savior. He was also a baseball prospect, drafted by the New York Yankees with a legitimate alternative career path. The Baltimore Colts held the first overall pick. They were a moribund franchise, mismanaged and unappealing. Elway and his agent, the shrewd Marvin Demoff, understood the leverage. Elway did not want to play in Baltimore. He publicly stated he would play baseball if the Colts drafted him. This was not a bluff. It was a credible threat to deprive the NFL of its most marketable star. The Colts, under intense pressure from the league office which wanted its prize asset in a favorable market, drafted him anyway. The standoff commenced. Elway's threat exposed the one vulnerability in the draft machine. It required the player's acquiescence. He could not choose his employer, but he could choose not to work. For a player of Elway's stature, that choice had financial consequences for the entire league. The Colts, realizing they held an asset that would never play for them, were forced to trade his rights. They dealt him to the Denver Broncos, a team and a city Elway found acceptable. Elway got his destination. The Broncos got a legend. The Colts got a package of players and a draft pick, a fraction of Elway's true value. The system had bent, but it did not break. It absorbed the shock through a trade, reaffirming that even in defiance, the player was still an asset to be bartered. Elway's power came from an external option, baseball, and a willingness to forgo his football dream, a leverage point almost no other player possesses. 21 years later, the scenario repeated with eerie symmetry, but with the system further entrenched. Eli Manning, coming out of Ole Miss, was the consensus top quarterback, the son of legend Archie Manning, who had been brutalized on terrible teams. The Manning family had learned a harsh lesson. Destination matters. The San Diego Chargers, a struggling franchise with a reputation for organizational dysfunction at the time, held the first pick. Archie Manning, acting as his son's de facto agent, made it known privately, then publicly, that Eli would not play for San Diego. There was no baseball threat this time. The leverage was pure reputation and a willingness to engage in a potentially career-damaging holdout. The Chargers, like the Colts before them, called the bluff. They drafted Manning. The cameras captured Eli's stony, unhappy face in the green room, a stark contrast to the typical jubilation. It was a shocking image. The draft's celebratory narrative punctured by open rejection. Again, a trade was forced. The Chargers dealt Manning to the New York Giants for a package that included another quarterback, Phillip Rivers, and draft picks. Manning got his glamour market and a stable franchise. The Giants got 2 Super Bowl MVPs. The Chargers got an excellent quarterback in Rivers, but they had been publicly spurned and denied the central asset. The Manning maneuver proved that the Elway playbook could still work, but only for a player whose pedigree, position, and perceived value were so high that his refusal to play constituted a league-wide crisis. These episodes are celebrated in football lore as dramatic power plays, tales of stars controlling their destiny. But that framing is a profound misreading. They are not evidence of player power. They are grotesque highlight reels of the system's brutal inequality. The fact that these stories are so rare, so legendary, proves the rule. For every Elway or Manning, there are 10,000 players who have no leverage at all. The running back from a poor background, the linebacker who is already physically battered from college, the late-round pick with a degree in general studies. They have no baseball career to fall back on, no famous father to orchestrate a public campaign, no certainty that their skills are irreplaceable. Their only power is the power to say no, which is the power to disappear. The system is designed to make that an unthinkable choice. Furthermore, the success of these maneuvers reinforced the system's resilience. In both cases, the resolution was a trade. The player did not become a free agent. He did not break the draft. He was reallocated within it. The monopsony held. The exclusive negotiating rights merely transferred from one team to another. The NFL's control over the player's entry point was never challenged. Only the destination was altered under extreme duress. The league office, while likely facilitating the trades behind the scenes to avoid a messy holdout, never questioned the fundamental right of the Colts or Chargers to draft and own those rights. The drama actually served to underscore the draft's ultimate authority. Even when it creates a crisis, it remains the only game in town. The Elway and Manning stories are used as folklore to suggest that the system has flexibility, that a player with enough will can shape his future. This is a dangerous myth. It places the burden of resistance on the individual possessing nearly impossible leverage, rather than on the structure that denies leverage to everyone. It makes the system seem fair because, on very rare occasions, it can be gamed by the ultra-elite. For the vast majority of players, the message of these sagas is the opposite. Comply. You do not have the power to do what they did. Your dream is too fragile, your alternatives too few, your voice too small. So put on the hat they give you, smile for the camera, and be grateful for the slot. The machine rolls on, its gears oiled by the dreams of the compliant, its structure occasionally stressed but never shattered by the resistance of kings. And having solidified its control over entry and destination, the league would soon turn its ingenuity to the next logical step. Not just controlling where a player entered, but drastically reducing the price of admission for everyone. The public narrative was irresistible, and the NFL owners wielded it with the precision of a surgeon. For years, a specific grievance had been cultivated in the media and among fans: the overpaid, unproven rookie. The poster children were players like Jamarcus Russell, the first overall pick by the Oakland Raiders in 2007, who received $32 million in guaranteed money before his career flamed out in a haze of underperformance and disinterest. Or Sam Bradford, who in 2010 signed a record $78 million contract with $50 million guaranteed before ever taking an NFL snap. The outrage was palpable. How could a kid who had never played a down make more than a proven veteran? It was framed as a moral issue, a distortion of meritocracy. The league's owners, along with a vocal contingent of veteran players, nodded in solemn agreement. Something had to be done. The solution, arrived at during the bitter 2011 lockout, was the rookie wage scale. Hailed as a common-sense reform, it was presented as a victory for fiscal sanity and veteran respect. But beneath this veneer of fairness lay one of the most coldly efficient maneuvers in sports labor history. The rookie wage scale was not a correction of an imbalance. It was the final, masterful tightening of the draft's monopsony vice. It used public sentiment as a wedge and veteran self-interest as a lever to institutionalize the dramatic underpayment of elite incoming talent, further transferring wealth from players to owners and extending the period of absolute team control. Before the scale, rookie contracts, while suppressed by the draft, were still subject to negotiation within a loose slotting system based on draft position. This led to protracted, often ugly holdouts for top picks and the occasional megadeal for quarterbacks. The owners hated the uncertainty and the upfront capital risk. The 2011 CBA eliminated that. It implemented a rigid, predetermined pay structure for draft picks. The contract length, the total value, the signing bonus, and the annual salaries for every single pick in the draft were now largely fixed by formula. Negotiation was reduced to minor details. The effect was immediate and staggering. The guaranteed money for the first overall pick dropped by nearly 50% overnight. The total cost of the entire rookie pool plummeted. The owners had achieved something remarkable. They had taken an already collusive, non-competitive market and imposed a legislated price cap upon it. The fix for overpaid rookies was to make sure all rookies, especially the best ones, were systematically underpaid. The political genius of the move was in its coalition building. The owners successfully split the player constituency. They appealed directly to veteran players, who naturally resented rookies getting huge deals without proving themselves. The NFLPA, representing all players, faced an internal conflict. In exchange for accepting the rookie wage scale, veterans won a slightly larger share of overall league revenue, the salary cap percentage, and other benefits. It was a classic divide-and-conquer strategy. The veterans traded the economic rights of future rookies, players who were not yet in the union, who had no vote, for present gains for themselves. The union leadership made a pragmatic, perhaps unavoidable choice. But the consequence was the formalization of a massive wealth transfer from the incoming labor force to the incumbent owners, with veterans getting a smaller slice of that transferred pie as a consolation prize. The scale did more than just suppress salaries. It extended control. Rookie contracts for first-round picks were set at 4 years, with a team option for a 5th year. This meant a team could control a first-round pick's prime athletic years, ages 22 to 27, at a fraction of his market value. For a star player, the difference between his scale-mandated salary and his true open market value over those 5 years could easily exceed $50 million. That is $50 million in monopsony rent extracted directly by the franchise. The scale transformed top draft picks from risky investments into high-value, cost-controlled assets. It turned the draft from a talent acquisition tool into a corporate procurement strategy with locked-in, below-market costs. The public bought the narrative completely. The media celebrated the end of holdout drama and the more reasonable rookie contracts. But this perspective missed the forest for a single gnarled tree. The problem was never that rookies were overpaid. The problem was that the draft system prevented a free market from determining their true worth. The scale didn't solve that problem. It doubled down on it. It replaced the occasional headline-grabbing overpay with the universal, systematic underpayment of every single entrant into the league. It made the suppression of wages not a byproduct of the system, but its explicit, celebrated feature. Furthermore, the scale created a perverse incentive structure for teams. With the financial risk of a high draft pick dramatically reduced, teams became more willing to gamble on athletic traits in early rounds, knowing the cost of failure was lower. It also made trading draft picks more attractive than ever, as the contracts attached to those picks were now predictable and cheap. The draft itself became an even more valuable currency, further cementing its central role. The owners had not just saved money, they had increased the efficiency and predictability of their monopsony. The rookie wage scale stands as the ultimate testament to the NFL's ability to reframe a power grab as a principled reform. It used a legitimate grievance of veteran players as a Trojan horse to enact a sweeping change that primarily benefited ownership. It turned the players against each other, present against future, and in doing so, secured the financial architecture of the draft for a generation. The draft was no longer just a mechanism for allocating talent. It was now a mechanism for allocating prepaid, discounted talent. With the cost of entry-level labor firmly capped, the league could now focus on fine-tuning the mechanisms that controlled players on the back end of their careers, ensuring that the freedom they finally achieved after 5 years remained a freedom carefully circumscribed by the very agreement that had bound them at the start. The rookie wage scale was a monumental victory for cost containment, but for the NFL's architects of control, it was only phase 1. They had successfully suppressed the entry-level price of labor. But a strategic problem remained. The most valuable assets, the first-round picks, the potential superstars, were still on a path to freedom. After a 4-year rookie deal, a player would become a restricted free agent, and then an unrestricted free agent. For a team that had drafted a transformative talent, the prospect of losing him to the open market at age 26 or 27, just as he entered his absolute prime, was a terrifying prospect. It threatened to undo the financial advantage of the draft. The solution, embedded within the same 2011 CBA that created the wage scale, was a provision of elegant, ruthless efficiency, the 5th-year option for first-round picks. This was not a minor contractual clause. It was an invention of a new chain, specifically designed to extend the period of monopsony control over the league's most precious human capital. It demonstrated that the evolution of the CBA is not towards freedom, but towards more sophisticated forms of retention. The 5th-year option works with cold simplicity. For players selected in the first round of the draft, their team holds a unilateral option to extend the rookie contract by a 5th year. The salary for that 5th year is predetermined by the CBA based on the player's draft position and performance criteria, Pro Bowls, playing time. The team must decide whether to exercise this option after the player's 3rd season, before his 4th. There is no negotiation. The team says yes or no. If yes, the player is bound for a 5th season at a salary that, while a raise from his rookie deal, is almost certainly below his true market value as a proven star. If no, the player enters his fourth and final contract year knowing he will be a free agent at the end of it. The option is a tool of profound leverage. It forces an early decision point that benefits the team in every scenario. For the player, the fifth-year option is a delayed sentence. It pushes back his first chance at unrestricted free agency by an entire year, from after his fourth season to after his fifth. This is not a trivial delay. In the brutal lifespan of an NFL career, age 26 versus 27 can be the difference between seeking a long-term contract at one's athletic peak and potentially having to prove one's health for another season. It gives the team an extra year of cost-controlled play from a player they drafted. But more insidiously, it resets the clock on the franchise tag. The franchise tag, which we will examine next, can be applied to a player whose contract has expired. By exercising the fifth-year option, a team effectively adds a year before the franchise tag clock even starts. This means a team can control a first-round pick for 5 years on the rookie scale, then franchise tag him for 2 more years, locking him up for 7 seasons total, often the entirety of his physical prime, before he ever sniffs genuine free agency. The economic effect is a further extraction of monopsony rent. Let's take a hypothetical star edge rusher, drafted in the top 10. His true market value after 3 Pro Bowl seasons might be $25 million per year. His fifth-year option salary, as dictated by the CBA, might be $12 million. By exercising the option, the team gets a year of a $25 million player for $12 million, a $13 million discount. That is $13 million in value transferred from the player to the team, sanctioned by the collective bargaining agreement. It is a legally mandated underpayment for services rendered. The player has no recourse. He cannot reject the option if the team picks it up. He can hold out, but that costs him salary and invokes the wrath of the fans and media. He is trapped by the deal his union agreed to years before he was drafted. The fifth-year option also creates a perverse set of incentives and psychological pressures. For a player coming off a serious injury in his third year, the team might decline the option, making him a lame duck in his fourth season, playing for his next contract with no security. For a player who has outperformed his draft slot, the option salary feels like an insult, a reminder that the system values his draft position more than his actual production. It creates a year of servitude where the player is physically risking his future for a team that has already signaled it controls him for an additional season at a below-market rate. It breeds resentment during what should be a celebratory ascent to stardom. This clause is a perfect example of how the NFL's legal and economic innovation is directed towards one goal: maximizing the period of team control and minimizing the period of player leverage. The draft captures the player. The rookie scale depresses his initial cost. The fifth-year option extends the period of that depression. Each step is a logical, calculated progression in the management of a depreciating asset. The player's career is segmented into controlled phases: the cheap rookie, the cost-controlled option year, the franchise tag years. True, unfettered free agency is pushed to the horizon, often until a player is approaching 30. When his value may already be declining due to physical toll. The invention of the fifth-year option reveals the true nature of the partnership in collective bargaining. It is not a negotiation between equals to find a fair balance. It is a process where one side, the owners, constantly devises new mechanisms to optimize their control, and the other side, the union, is forced to accept them as part of a larger package deal for revenue share and benefits for the majority. The fifth-year option primarily affects first-round picks, a small minority of the union membership. It was likely traded away for something that benefited the broader rank and file. Once again, the future earnings of the elite few were bargained away by the present needs of the many. The system's resilience relies on this continual internal compromise. But for the player living under the option, it feels less like a compromise and more like a sentence being extended. And just when he thinks the sentence is up, the league has one final draconian measure to ensure he never truly leaves the premises. The journey from draft day to free agency is meant to be an evolution, from bound apprentice to journeyed master, from cost-controlled asset to self-determining professional. The NFL's system, however, is designed to resist this evolution at every turn. The draft captures, the fifth-year option extends, but there exists a final barrier: a last line of defense so powerful and inherently contradictory that it stands as the ultimate monument to the draft's philosophy of perpetual control. It is the franchise tag. Along with its lesser sibling, the transition tag, this mechanism is the draconian enforcer that ensures the draft's initial claim on a player can, in practice, be made nearly permanent. It is the tool that allows a team to declare, "We drafted you, we developed you, and we will never truly let you go." The tag is the final, brutal denial of the free market, the proof that the journey to free agency is not a right, but a privilege that can be revoked with a single, unilateral designation. The franchise tag is a study in cold efficiency. Each NFL team can designate one impending free agent per year as its franchise player. There are two primary forms. The exclusive tag, which binds the player to his team at a one-year salary equal to the average of the top 5 salaries at his position, or 120% of his previous salary, whichever is greater. He cannot negotiate with other teams. The non-exclusive tag sets the salary at the average of the top 5 salaries at the position over the last 5 years. The player can negotiate with other teams, but if he signs an offer sheet, his original team has the right to match it. If they choose not to match, they receive 2 first-round draft picks as compensation, a price so prohibitively high it virtually never happens. The transition tag is slightly less restrictive, offering only the right to match, with no draft pick compensation if the player leaves. The effect is the same. The player's path to the open market is blocked. He plays another year for the team on a one-year contract at a high salary that is often still below his true multi-year market value, and with no long-term security. The tag is the direct, legally sanitized descendant of the Rozelle rule. Where Commissioner Rozelle had arbitrary power to set crippling compensation, the tag automates that punishment. 2 first-round picks. It is a preordained, collectively bargained deterrent so severe it functions as a prohibition. It takes the old, illegal group boycott and codifies it into the labor agreement. The union, in agreeing to the tag in the 1993 CBA and reaffirming it in every CBA since, signed off on a system that allows teams to unilaterally strip a player of his earned free agency. The justification, once again, is competitive balance. A team cannot afford to lose its franchise player, but this framing is deceptive. The tag is not used only on true franchise cornerstones. It is used as a tactical tool to control assets, delay decisions, and gain leverage. It is applied to star pass rushers, lockdown cornerbacks, and elite offensive linemen. Players who have earned the right to seek their value on the open market, but are told their value is confined to a single bidder. For the player, the tag is a professional and personal purgatory. Financially, while the one-year salary is substantial, it denies him the life-changing security of a long-term contract with tens of millions in guaranteed money. He plays the season on a one-year deal, knowing a major injury could destroy his future earning potential. Emotionally, it breeds profound resentment. The tag is a statement that the team values his services, but not enough to commit to him long-term. Tells him he is important, but not a partner. He is an asset to be managed, not a person to be invested in. The player is forced to report, to risk his body, to perform at an elite level, all while being denied the freedom he has worked 7 years to achieve. It is the ultimate thank you for outperforming your draft position. Another year of indentured servitude, albeit in a gilded cage. The tag's most insidious feature is its repeatability. A team can franchise tag a player for a second consecutive year at a 120% increase over the first tag salary. They can, in theory, do it a third time at a 144% increase. This creates a financial escalator that eventually becomes untenable for the team, but it allows them to control a player's entire prime. A first-round pick can be held for 5 years on his rookie deal, with the option, then tagged for 2 more years. That's 7 seasons, the heart of a career, before he hits true free agency. By that time, he may be 29 or 30 with significant physical wear, reducing his market value. The tag ensures that a player's first and only major contract negotiation often comes on the downward slope of his career, not at its peak. This mechanism exposes the fundamental hypocrisy at the heart of the NFL's labor model. The league and its teams constantly preach the virtues of loyalty, of being a Steeler for life, or protecting the shield. Yet, the franchise tag is the ultimate act of disloyalty from the institution to the individual. Teams cut players under contract every day for business reasons. They trade them without consultation. But when a player seeks to exercise a contractual right to leave, the team can invoke the tag to stop him. The loyalty is a one-way street, paved with contractual clauses that flow only in the direction of control. The franchise tag is the draft's ultimate enforcement mechanism. The draft says, "You will begin your career where we tell you." The tag says, "You may not end your career where you choose." It is the final, logical extension of Bert Bell's original vision. A system where the player's labor is not his own to sell, but a resource to be allocated and retained at the discretion of the cartel. It ensures that even after a player has fulfilled every obligation, shattered every expectation, and earned his freedom a dozen times over on the field, the system can still reach out with a contractual hand and pull him back. The journey from the green room is not a path to liberation. It is a corridor with a series of locked doors, each requiring a new key held only by the team. And for the vast majority of players who never face the tag, its existence serves as a chilling reminder of the absolute power that awaits them should they ever become too valuable to let go. It is the shadow that falls across every contract negotiation, the unspoken threat that ensures compliance long before the tag is ever used. But this system of control is not abstract. It has human faces, stories of men whose dreams of self-determination were deferred, altered, or broken by the machinery they helped fuel. The legal architecture of the draft, the exemption, the scale, the option, the tag, can feel abstract, a maze of clauses and court citations. But this architecture is not made of stone and steel. It is made of flesh and blood, ambition and time. Its walls are felt not by corporations, but by individuals. To understand the true cost of the system, we must step away from the legal briefs and economic models and listen to the stories of the human capital it was designed to manage. These are not the tales of Elways or Mannings, who bent the machine. These are the stories of the bound, the vast majority whose professional lives were irrevocably shaped and often diminished by the draft's impersonal allocation. They are the journeymen, the busts, the solid players who performed their labor within a cage they did not build and could never escape. Their careers are the data points that prove the system's ruthless efficiency and its human toll. Consider the story of a player like Ryan Leaf, though not for the reasons you think. The narrative of Leaf, the colossal bust picked second overall in 1998, is always told as a cautionary tale about draft evaluation and personal failure. But viewed through the lens of the system, his story is also one of catastrophic misallocation with zero recourse. The draft forced the San Diego Chargers to invest their future in Leaf because the Indianapolis Colts took Peyton Manning first. The Chargers had no alternative. The draft presented them with a binary choice at the top of their board. That misallocation doomed the franchise for years. But for Leaf, the system worked in a perverse way. It made him instantly wealthy based on potential, yes, but it also placed him in an environment for which he was catastrophically unsuited, without the maturity or support structure to succeed. Could a different city, a different coach, a different developmental path have altered his trajectory? We'll never know. The draft denied him and every team that possibility. He was a resource assigned to a zip code, and the assignment was final. His failure is remembered. The system's role in that failure is forgotten. Then there is the story of the journeyman offensive lineman, a third-round pick. Let's call him Mike. Mike was drafted by a team with a poor offensive line coach and a chaotic front office. He struggled for 2 years, labeled a borderline bust. His rookie contract, set by the slot, was modest. When it expired, he was a restricted free agent, but with no strong film, he garnered little interest. He signed a 1-year prove-it deal with a new team for the veteran minimum. There, under a better coach, he flourished, becoming a solid starter. But by then, he was 27. He signed a mid-level extension, a fraction of what he would have earned if he'd been developed properly from the start. The draft didn't just determine his first team. It set in motion a chain of delayed development and suppressed earnings that defined his entire earning window. His prime years were spent climbing out of the hole dug by his initial misallocation. The system captured him at his cheapest, wasted his most malleable years, and and released him onto the market only after his peak value had been compromised. Consider the wide receiver, a speedster taken in the late first round by a run-heavy, defensive-minded team. For 4 years, he runs clear-out routes to stretch the field, his rare talent underutilized in a conservative scheme. He puts up pedestrian numbers. His fifth-year option is declined. He finally hits free agency at 27, his prime years statistically behind him, his reputation that of a deep threat who never panned out. He signs a modest deal with a pass-happy team and suddenly flourishes, but the mega contract that would have accompanied a 1,400-yard season at age 24 is now forever out of reach. His talent was not a secret. It was simply mismatched by the draft's allocation. His career earnings are millions less than they should have been, not due to a lack of skill, but due to a lack of fit imposed upon him by a lottery held before he could legally rent a car. The most poignant stories belong to the players who had no leverage at all, the late-round picks and undrafted free agents. For them, the draft is not a moment of celebration, but of profound anxiety. If they are picked in the 6th or 7th round, they sign for the league-mandated minimum with no guarantees. They are fodder for training camp, bodies to fill out a roster. They have no power to choose a team with a depth chart that favors their skills. They go where they are told, and they cling to the bottom of the roster, knowing they can be cut at any moment without financial consequence to the team. Their entire careers are lived on the knife's edge of transaction wires. They are the purest form of disposable labor in the system, their dreams used as cheap fuel for the preseason grind. If they beat the odds and stick, their earnings are perpetually at the bottom of the scale. They are the proof that the draft is not a meritocracy, but a caste system. Your draft number is your professional birthright, determining your starting salary, your guarantee of opportunity, and the ceiling of your team's initial patience. These narratives collectively reveal the draft's core injustice. It substitutes the judgment of 32 war rooms for the dynamics of a free market. It assumes that the league's collective evaluation is not only correct, but should be enforceable through binding assignment. It denies a fundamental truth, that success in professional football is a complex alchemy of talent, fit, coaching, scheme, health, and timing. The draft arbitrarily dictates the first and most crucial of these variables, fit. It forces a marriage between player and team, and then uses a series of contractual locks to make divorce or even trial separation nearly impossible for years. The human cost is measured in wasted potential, diminished earnings, and careers spent solving problems not of their own making, in cities not of their own choosing. The system celebrates the few perfect matches it creates while quietly burying the evidence of the many mismatches it mandates. It is a machine that grinds the dreams of the many to ensure the prosperity of the few, the owners who benefit from the cost control, and the tiny minority of stars who transcend their circumstances. For the rest, the journey from the green room is not the start of a dream. It is the beginning of a negotiation with a fate they did not choose, armed with a contract that gives them no say. And as they look at their careers in the rearview mirror, they are left to wonder not just what they achieved, but what might have been in a world where they had the right to choose. To fully comprehend the NFL's draft system, one must step outside of it. Isolation breeds acceptance. We have been conditioned to see the draft, the rookie scale, the franchise tag as the natural, inevitable order of professional football. But they are not. They are a specific, highly restrictive model of labor management. By placing the NFL system beside those of other major sports leagues, its unique severity comes into stark, unflattering relief. The comparison reveals that American football players operate under the most restrictive, least agentic labor market of any major professional athletes in the world. The question then becomes not why the system exists, but why the players have accepted it for so long. Major League Baseball offers the closest historical parallel, but a divergent modern path. Baseball invented the reserve clause, the original forever chain. But after the seismic Curt Flood case and the advent of free agency in the 1970s, MLB's system evolved differently. While it has an amateur draft, its impact is far less restrictive. A drafted player typically spends several years in the minor leagues, not on the major league roster. His clock to free agency doesn't start until he reaches the majors. Crucially, once he accrues 6 years of major league service time, he becomes an unrestricted free agent with no further strings attached. There is no franchise tag. No team can unilaterally prevent him from testing the open market. A star like Bryce Harper or Manny Machado reaches free agency in his mid-20s and can sign with any team, for any length, with no compensation owed to his old club beyond a possible draft pick. The control period is long, but it is finite and absolute. There is no option year or tag to extend it. The player's path to true, unfettered free agency is clear and guaranteed. The National Basketball Association presents a more complex, but ultimately more player-friendly, ecosystem. The NBA has a draft and a rookie scale similar in concept to the NFL's. Its control mechanisms, like restricted free agency, where a team can match an offer sheet, are potent. However, the critical differences are in scale and leverage. NBA rookie contracts are only 4 years for first-round picks, with restricted free agency after that. The franchise tag does not exist. More importantly, the influence of a single superstar in a 5-on-5 sport is so monumental that it creates inherent leverage. Players like LeBron James, Kevin Durant, and Kawhi Leonard have repeatedly used their impending free agency to force trades to their preferred destinations, effectively choosing their team's years before their contracts expire. The player empowerment era in the NBA is a direct result of stars understanding and wielding their market power within, and sometimes against, the system. The NFL's 53-man rosters and violent, interdependent nature dilute individual leverage, making such movement far rarer and more difficult to engineer. The most illuminating contrast lies across the Atlantic in the world of European soccer. Here, the concept of a draft is non-existent. The system is a pure and often ruthless global free market from the moment a player turns professional. Youth players are developed in club academies and sign their first professional contracts with those clubs. But these deals are short. The primary mechanism of control is the contract itself. A player under contract can only move if his club agrees to sell him, or if a rival club activates a release clause, a pre-negotiated buyout price embedded in the contract. There is no allocation. There is no tag. A 22-year-old superstar can be transferred for hundreds of millions of dollars, with the fee going to his selling club, and he can negotiate a salary that reflects a true global bidding war. While this system has its own exploitative elements, particularly for very young players, it grants the elite performer something the NFL never does. The ability to force a move to a preferred club by agitating for a transfer, and to capture a much larger share of his gargantuan market value through salary and bonuses. The system is built on mobility and market valuation, not on allocation and cost control. So why does the NFL's uniquely restrictive system persist? Why do the most physically endangered athletes have the least control over their careers? The answers are rooted in history, structure, and leverage. First, the historical accident. Bert Bell's system was adopted in a legal gray area and survived long enough to become tradition. Second, the structural factor. The NFL's hard salary cap, tied to league revenue, is the owner's grand bargain with the players. The cap guarantees players a defined percentage of revenue, creating a fixed pie. In return for this guaranteed share, the players have accepted extreme restrictions on how that pie is distributed and how they can move between teams. The cap and the draft are two sides of the same coin, a system of cost certainty. The owners traded revenue transparency for labor control. Third, and most crucially, is the leverage imbalance. An NFL career is, on average, 3 years. The window to earn life-changing money is terrifyingly short. The physical risk is immediate and catastrophic. This creates a desperate urgency that undermines collective will. It is harder to sustain a prolonged strike or holdout when your earning window is so narrow and your replacement is readily available. The 1987 strike failed because replacement players crossed the line. The 2011 lockout ended with the players accepting the rookie wage scale because they needed to get back to work. The constant threat of career-ending injury makes players risk-averse. They will take a known, suppressed salary today over the gamble of a protracted fight for a larger, uncertain one tomorrow. Finally, there is the powerful myth of parity. The NFL has sold the draft and the cap as the sacred guardians of competitive balance, the reasons why any team can win on any Sunday. This narrative is bought not only by fans, but by many players, especially those on middle-of-the-road teams. They believe or are told to believe that these restrictions are necessary for the health of the sport they love. It is a brilliant piece of ideological framing. Your lack of freedom is the price of the game's greatness. In the NBA or European soccer, where dynasties and super teams are more common, the argument for restrictive measures is harder to make. In the NFL, parity is the shield behind which the monopsony hides. The comparison does not suggest that other systems are purely utopian. They have their own flaws and exploitations, but they reveal the NFL's model as an extreme outlier in its comprehensive suppression of early career mobility and earning power. The NFL player is the only one who can be unilaterally assigned, have his salary predetermined by a chart, be held for an option year, and then be prevented from leaving via a tag, all under the protective legal umbrella of a collective bargaining agreement his union signed. This level of control is unique, and it forces us to confront the final, pivotal piece of the puzzle: the role of the union itself. How does the NFL Players Association, charged with representing these athletes, navigate a bargaining table where the system's very foundation is designed to limit the very people it represents? The answer lies in the brutal calculus of collective action, where the needs of the many often sacrifice the freedoms of the few. The NFL Players Association exists in a state of perpetual, existential tension. It is a union unlike any other, representing a workforce with the shortest careers, the highest physical risk, and the most restrictive entry-level controls in professional sports. Its fundamental dilemma is this: how do you bargain for the rights of men when the very system you are bargaining with is designed to limit those rights, and when the membership you represent is constantly turning over, its immediate interests often in direct conflict? The history of the NFLPA is not a story of steady progress toward liberation, but a series of brutal, pragmatic trade-offs. In the calculus of collective bargaining, gains for the entrenched majority, the veterans, have repeatedly been funded by concessions on the rights of the incoming class, the rookies and young stars. The union doesn't just negotiate with the owners. It negotiates with the future, and often the future loses. From its fragile beginnings, the NFLPA's power has been hamstrung by the nature of the industry. Unlike industrial unions with a stable, long-term workforce, the NFLPA's membership is a river, not a lake. Every year, hundreds of new players enter, and hundreds leave. The median career length is around 3 years. This means the majority of the union's dues-paying members at any given moment are players with less than 4 years of experience. Players still under the thumb of the rookie wage scale, the fifth-year option, and with no leverage for free agency. Their immediate interest is in higher minimum salaries, better benefits, and improved working conditions. The players with the most to gain from dismantling the draft or the franchise tag, the established stars, are a small minority. This creates a built-in conflict. The union leadership, to maintain solidarity and win strikes, must deliver benefits that appeal to the rank-and-file majority. Too often, those benefits are paid for by sacrificing the economic rights of the elite few or by locking future players into the same restrictive systems. The pattern is etched into the history of collective bargaining agreements. The landmark 1993 CBA, which brought free agency and the salary cap, was the archetype. The veterans won mobility and a share of revenue. The price? Explicit union agreement to the draft and the new, restrictive free agency rules, including the franchise tag. The union traded the principle of a free market for the practice of a managed market with tangible gains for current players. They legitimized the controls to escape them slightly. The 2011 CBA is the most glaring modern example. Faced with a lockout, the union's priority was to maintain the overall revenue share and improve health and safety benefits. To achieve this, they accepted the rookie wage scale. The public rationale was about veteran respect, but the economic reality was a massive wealth transfer from incoming rookies to owners, with veterans getting a portion of that transfer funneled back to them via a slightly higher cap percentage. The union leadership made a calculated decision: sacrifice the future earnings of the top draft picks, who were not yet in the union, to secure benefits for the current membership. It was pragmatic. It was also a profound abandonment of the next generation's economic potential. This internal conflict is the owner's greatest strategic advantage. They understand the union's fractured priorities. They can propose a deal that raises minimum salaries by a few $100,000, a huge win for the hundreds of players on the roster bubble, and pay for it by extending the fifth-year option or making the franchise tag slightly more restrictive, which only affects a few dozen stars. The majority votes yes. The stars are outvoted. The system of control is subtly reinforced, and the union appears to have won a victory for its members. This dynamic ensures that radical challenges to the draft tag scale architecture are never seriously on the table. The union fights at the margins, tweaking the tag formulas, arguing over the percentage of revenue, improving disability benefits. It does not fight to burn down the plantation. It fights for better conditions inside the fence. The union's structural weakness is compounded by the constant threat of decertification and antitrust litigation, the nuclear option. This was the path chosen after the failed 1987 strike, leading to the McNeil case and eventually the 1993 CBA. It is a dangerous all-or-nothing gambit. Decertifying the union turns players back into individual commodities who can sue the league under antitrust law. It risks years of legal warfare with no guaranteed income. It requires near-total player solidarity, which is fragile given the short careers and varying financial positions of the members. The owners know this. The mere existence of the non-statutory labor exemption, the shield they built with the union's help, makes decertification a less threatening weapon. The union is trapped in a paradox. Its agreement to the CBA is what gives the owners their legal protection, but revoking that agreement through decertification is a perilous step into the unknown that most players, focused on their short windows, are unwilling to take. The current leadership of the NFLPA faces this dilemma every day. They must project strength while navigating these inherent contradictions. They must convince a 22-year-old rookie that accepting a scale-mandated contract is for the good of the brotherhood, while also fighting for a 28-year-old star who is being franchise tagged for the second time. They must bargain with the chains, trying to loosen some links without breaking the whole structure, knowing that breaking it could leave players worse off. It is a nearly impossible task. The union's victories are real. The rise in minimum salaries, the improvements in post-career healthcare, the limits on training camp practices. But these are victories within the system. They have not altered the system's fundamental geometry of control. The union's dilemma ultimately reflects a deeper truth about the NFL's economic model. It is a model built on the efficient management of short-term human capital. The union, by its very nature as a collective of that capital, is forced to operate within that framework. It can seek a larger share of the harvest, but it cannot easily challenge the fact that its members are treated as a crop to be planted, cultivated, and eventually replaced according to a master plan devised by the landowners. The final question, then, is whether a new generation of players armed with more information, more media savvy, and a different mindset can begin to shift this calculus. Can the commodity become conscious of its own commodification and demand not just a better price, but a say in the market itself? The answer may lie not in the union hall, but in the mindset of the young men now entering the green room, who have grown up watching the machinery in full televised view. The modern NFL draft prospect enters the arena with advantages unimaginable to his predecessors. He is not a wide-eyed kid stepping off a train into a smoky room of owners. He is a brand, often cultivated from high school. He has an agent, a marketing team, a social media following. He has undergone months of intensive training at specialized facilities, preparing not just his body, but his mind for the combine, the interviews, the media blitz. The coverage of the draft is now 24/7, a year-round industry of analysis and speculation that orbits around him. The narrative is player-centric. His journey, his adversity, his character. The green room is a glamorous studio. The walk to the stage is a red carpet moment. This new reality creates an illusion of power, a sense that the player is now the central actor in the drama. But does this heightened awareness, this media saturation, truly alter the fundamental power dynamic? Or does it simply apply a more sophisticated, player-friendly veneer to the same century-old machinery of control? Today's elite prospect is undoubtedly more informed. He can watch documentaries about the business of football. He can read about the rookie wage scale and the franchise tag. He sees peers hold out, demand trades, and leverage social media to shape public opinion. He has seen the successes of the Elway/Manning maneuver and the more recent, refined versions of it, where top quarterback prospects like Trevor Lawrence or Joe Burrow, while not forcing trades, have exerted soft power through their agents to signal preferred destinations. The information barrier has been lowered. He is not walking into the dark. He knows the shape of the cage. But knowing the shape of a cage is not the same as possessing the key. The rookie wage scale still dictates his first contract. The draft still determines which team holds his rights. The fifth-year option and franchise tag still loom on the horizon. His awareness does not change the legally binding architecture of the collective bargaining agreement. It only makes his initial confinement more intellectually frustrating. The media's role in this dynamic is deeply ambivalent. On one hand, platforms like ESPN and NFL Network have built empires on draft coverage that glorifies the player. The prospect is analyzed, celebrated, and turned into a celebrity before he plays it down. This attention does confer a form of leverage. A canny agent can use a client's media profile to create buzz, to shape narrative, to make a team feel public pressure to select him or to meet certain contract demands. The media turns the prospect into a valuable commodity not just for his on-field talent, but for his marketability. This can influence decisions at the margins. But on the other hand, the media is an essential component of the draft spectacle. It is the amplifier that makes the event so powerful, that sells the dream so effectively. The cameras in the green room don't empower the player. They exploit his vulnerability for ratings. The emotional close-up on a falling prospect is television gold. The media, in its symbiotic relationship with the league, ultimately reinforces the system's importance. It makes the draft the Super Bowl of the offseason, cementing its cultural and economic centrality. The player is the star of the show, but the show is owned and produced by the league. The true test of this modern awareness is not at the draft, but in the years that follow. Does a player's early education in the business lead to more unified, strategic action later in his career? We see glimpses. Players are more savvy about contract structures, about guarantees versus total value. Stars are more willing to hold in, to stage soft holdouts by showing up but not practicing, to use their platforms to apply pressure. The collective awareness of the franchise tag's injustice is higher than ever. But this individual savvy often crashes against the collective action problem of the union. A player may understand the tag is wrong, but will he vote to decertify the union and risk his career to fight it? The shortened career window and the ever-present threat of injury still act as powerful deterrents to radical action. Awareness breeds frustration more often than it breeds revolution. The looming horizon is the next round of collective bargaining agreement negotiations. The current CBA runs through the 2030 season. The modern, aware player will be a central figure in those talks. The issues are clear. The franchise tag, the fifth-year option, the share of revenue from new media deals, the length of the rookie scale. Will this generation, having grown up with more information and seeing the financial explosion of the league, demand a fundamental renegotiation of the control mechanisms? Or will they, like every generation before them, accept marginal improvements in benefits and revenue share in exchange for reaffirming the core system? The early signs are mixed. The 2020 CBA was ratified by a narrow margin, with many star players vocally opposed. They felt the deal did too little to address the tag and extended the regular season to 17 games without sufficient concessions. Yet it passed. The rank and file, the majority with shorter careers, voted for the immediate gains. The pattern held. The modern prospect may enter the league with his eyes open, but he quickly learns the same harsh economics. His career is a sprint, not a marathon, and the union's decisions will be made by the majority running the shortest races. So, the fundamental dynamic remains stubbornly unchanged. The draft is still the unassailable gate. The scale still dictates the price of admission. The option and the tag still delay the exit. The modern prospect has a better map of the prison, and his cell might have a flat-screen TV, but he is still a prisoner of the system's design. His awareness is a form of light, but light alone cannot melt chains forged in collective bargaining and hardened by a century of precedent. The real power will not come from individual awareness or media savvy, but from a future collective will that decides the price of their dreams is too high and the terms of their service are no longer acceptable. That moment has not yet arrived. For now, the most aware generation of players in history prepares to walk across the same stage, shake the same hand, and sign their names to the same old deal, hoping that their talent and their timing will be enough to eventually set them free. The machine, polished to a modern sheen, continues to hum, waiting for its next intake of human capital. But true change would require revisiting the draft's absolute power, the rookie scale, the 5 years of initial control, and that remains a distant prospect as it requires the union to prioritize the rights of future stars over the immediate gains of the current majority. In the end, the NFL draft is a mirror. It reflects the priorities of the league and, by extension, of us, the consumers. We have chosen parity over player freedom. We have chosen cost certainty for owners over market value for labor. We have chosen the compelling narrative of the underdog's hope over the less cinematic principle of a free labor market. The draft is not an anomaly. It is the logical outcome of those choices. It is a beautifully crafted, legally brilliant, and emotionally manipulative machine that delivers exactly what we have asked for. A perfectly balanced competition built on a foundation of perfectly engineered inequality. As the confetti falls on the latest first-round pick, as he holds the jersey aloft and smiles for a million flashes, remember the journey that brought him there. Remember Bert Bell's calculation, the court battles lost and won, the strategic retreat into collective bargaining, the economic models that quantify his suppressed worth. The stage is magnificent. The lights are blinding. But the transaction, at its heart, remains what it was in that Ritz-Carlton ballroom in 1936. The allocation of a human asset by a cartel that has convinced the world it is simply conducting a sport. The dream is real for the young man, but so is the machinery humming quietly beneath the stage, ensuring that in the National Football League, the balance of power is always and deliberately unbalanced. But this narrative asks us to accept a fundamental trade-off, that the only way to ensure fairness among 32 billionaire-owned franchises is to systematically disempower the 2,000 men who actually play the game. It argues that for the league to be balanced, the players must be unbalanced. Their freedom is the sacrificial lamb on the altar of competitive suspense. We, the fans, have accepted this bargain because it benefits our entertainment. We get a more unpredictable product, but we must confront the moral calculus of that entertainment. Are we comfortable that the sport's equilibrium is maintained by a legal and economic model that would be dismantled in any other industry? That the excitement of draft night is underpinned by a restraint of trade so effective it has become invisible? The system's resilience is rooted in its layered defenses. It is no longer just a rule. It is a tradition. It is no longer just a policy. It is a spectacle. It is no longer just a unilateral decree. It is a collectively bargained treaty. It is protected by labor law, sanctified by public sentiment, and celebrated by a media ecosystem it feeds. To challenge it is not merely to challenge a bad rule. It is to challenge the economic and cultural cornerstone of America's most powerful sports league. It is to argue against parity and tradition. This is why, despite legal victories and growing player awareness, the core architecture remains unshaken. The union fights at the edges, loosening a chain here, padding a wall there, but the prison itself is built into the foundation of the league's prosperity. So, what is the true cost of this competitive balance? It is measured in more than dollars transferred from player pockets to owner ledgers, though that sum is vast. The cost is measured in stifled potential, in careers spent solving problems of fit, not of the player's making. It is measured in the anxiety of the franchise tag star, playing on a one-year deal when he has earned a lifetime of security. It is measured in the quiet resignation of the journeyman, who knows his earnings are forever capped by where he was selected on a single April night years ago. The cost is a loss of professional autonomy, the denial of a basic right enjoyed by nearly every other professional, the right to choose your employer, to sell your labor to its highest valued use. The system also exacts a philosophical cost on the sport itself. It reduces the player, at the moment of his greatest hope, to a passive object. He is picked, he is slotted, he is optioned, he is tagged. The language is of things, not people. The draft's spectacle obscures this, wrapping the transaction in the emotional resonance of a dream realized. But the dream is narrowly defined. You may achieve glory, but you will do it on our terms, in our city, for our price. Your individual will is subordinate to the League's collective plan. This is the antithesis of the American ideals of freedom and meritocracy the League so often cloaks itself in. It is a collectivist system imposed for the benefit of capital. Looking to the future, the question is not whether the draft will disappear. It is too entrenched, too profitable, too central to the mythos. The real question is whether the next generation of players, heirs to the information age and witnesses to the League's financial stratosphere, can begin to reclaim some of the power that was engineered out of their market a century ago. Can they, in the next CBA negotiation, demand more than just a slightly larger slice of the pie? Can they demand a redesign of the plate? The fight will likely center on the franchise tag, the most visibly draconian tool. Abolishing it would be a start, a symbolic crack in the philosophy of perpetual control. The journey we have taken is not through a sporting tradition, but through the anatomy of a control mechanism. From the musty Philadelphia hotel room where Bert Bell solved an owner's problem, to the gleaming studios where the modern draft is televised, the story is one of remarkable institutional endurance and adaptation. We have followed the legal footwork, the initial step into the antitrust gray area, the retreat from the losing battles in Kapp and Mackey, and the strategic pivot into the fortified keep of the collective bargaining agreement. We have examined the economic machinery, the draft's price fixing, the rookie scale's wage suppression, the fifth-year options extension, and the franchise tag's ultimate veto. We have heard the human echoes, the stories of the misallocated, the mismatched, the bound. The conclusion is inescapable. The NFL draft is a masterful piece of institutional engineering, arguably the most successful in sports history. Its genius lies not in its fairness, but in its alchemy. It has successfully transformed collusion among employers into a sacred principle of competitive balance. It has rebranded the suppression of wages as fiscal responsibility. It has repackaged the restriction of labor mobility as league parity and fan engagement. It has taken a system of profound, deliberate inequality of bargaining power and sold it to the public as the essential, thrilling foundation of the game we love. This alchemy required a powerful narrative, and the NFL has been its master author. The draft is sold as the great equalizer, the mechanism that allows the worst team to get the best player, the engine of hope. And on the surface, it works. Teams do rise from the ashes. Underdogs do win. This parity is real, and it is a key ingredient in the league's cultural dominance.